In this video, I will be talking about the wiring and setup of the 24-volt DC through beam, retroreflective, and diffused photoelectric sensors. These are the three basic types of photoelectric sensors, and they come in many different shapes and sizes. Some of the larger photoelectric sensors have holes in the sensor body that can be used to mount the sensor, and some of the smaller photoelectric sensors require some type of bracket to hold them in place. You can buy pre-made brackets to mount these sensors, and these brackets can be adjustable or non-adjustable. If this is your first time here and you want to learn more industrial automation topics and keep your knowledge up to date, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon so you don't miss anything. A belt conveyor transporting an empty box will be used to explain how to set up each sensor. On this conveyor, the sensor will trigger the motor starter to start or stop the motor. I will also talk about troubleshooting these photoelectric sensors. First, I will show you how to wire the through-beam photoelectric sensor emitter. Through-beam sensors have two separate devices. One is called the emitter, and the other is called the receiver. The emitter is what sends the light out, and the receiver is what catches the light. Both of these sensor devices will need to be connected to 24-volt DC power. The receiver will also be connected to the 24-volt DC motor starter coil. To be safe, make sure the power is turned off before connecting any wires. To connect the emitter of the through-beam sensor to 24-volt DC power, connect the brown wire to 24-volt DC positive and the blue wire to 24-volt DC negative. The emitter is now hooked up and ready to use. The wires of the through-beam receiver, the retroreflective sensor, and the diffused sensor all get connected to the belt conveyor in the same way. So, to connect 24-volt DC power to any of these three sensors, connect the brown wire to 24-volt DC positive and the blue wire to 24-volt DC negative. Now, connect the sensor out black wire to the 24-volt DC motor starter coil to complete the wire connections. The sensor wire connections being complete, you can now turn the power back on. Now, I will show you how to mount these three sensors to the conveyor, starting with the through-beam sensor. I will use a pre-made adjustable bracket for all three sensors to make mounting and aiming of the sensors easier. With the through-beam sensor, use a straight edge to line up and mount the emitter and receiver, so they are straight across the conveyor belt from each other. Adjust the sensor if needed, and tighten everything down to lock the sensor in place. To check alignment, block and unblock the sensor with your hand to make sure the sensor indicator light turns on and off. The through-beam photoelectric sensor is now ready to test. With the retroreflective sensor, it needs a reflector to work. Use a straight edge to line up and mount the sensor and the reflector, so they are straight across the conveyor belt from each other. Adjust the sensor if needed, and tighten everything down to lock the sensor and reflector in place. To check alignment, block and unblock the sensor with your hand to make sure the sensor indicator light turns on and off. The retroreflective photoelectric sensor is now ready to test. To mount the diffused photoelectric sensor, put the empty box on the conveyor where you want it to stop. Mount the sensor at the front edge of the box, adjust, and tighten everything down. Diffused sensors have a sensitivity adjustment screw. If the sensitivity is set too high, the sensor might stay on all the time. If the sensitivity is set too low, it might not turn on. To set the sensitivity for this belt conveyor, put the box in front of the sensor in the middle of the conveyor belt. Adjust the sensitivity until the sensor indicator light just turns on with the box in this position. Block and unblock the sensor with the box in different positions to see if the sensor turns on and off, and this will also double-check the sensitivity setting. The diffused sensor is now ready to use. To test out these sensors, I will place an empty box on the conveyor belt and start the conveyor. If the photoelectric sensor is set up correctly, the box will travel to the sensor and then shut down the conveyor motor when it blocks the sensor. If the photoelectric sensor is not working correctly, the conveyor motor might not start. It might only run when the sensor is blocked, or it might not turn off. If the conveyor does not start, the sensor might need to be adjusted, or it might be dirty. Clean the lens of the sensor and check the alignment by blocking the sensor and watching the sensor indicator light to see if it turns off and on. If the light turns off and on, the sensor is aligned. If the light doesn't turn off and on, adjust the sensor so the emitter and receiver are aligned. If the conveyor still does not start, look at the motor starter and block the sensor again. If the sensor is working correctly, you should be able to hear the motor starter contacts close when the sensor gets blocked. If the motor starter contacts do not close, the sensor or sensor cable is bad and will need to be replaced. If the motor only runs when the sensor is blocked, it is probably in dark on mode. Flip the mode switch to light on mode to correct this issue. Some photoelectric sensors have a light on, dark on mode selector switch. Light on mode means the sensor output turns on when the receiver sees the emitter light. Dark on mode means the sensor output turns on when the receiver does not see the emitter light. If the conveyor motor stays running, the sensor might be misaligned and in dark mode. The sensor of the sensor cable might be bad and will need to be replaced. In review, by watching this video, you have learned about the three basic types of photoelectric sensors: through-beam, retroreflective, and diffused, how to connect the wires of these sensors, and how to set them up on a belt conveyor. You also learned how to troubleshoot these photoelectric sensors. That should do it for this video. Please let us know if you have any questions about wiring or setting up 24-volt DC photoelectric sensors in the comments below. Also, make sure to like this video if you found it helpful. This will help other automation engineers like you find this video. Thanks for watching. Want to learn PLC programming in an easy-to-understand format and take your career to the next level? Head on over to realpars.com.